Well, at the end of a film, it's the credits that roll. And the first credits you get are usually the big names, the big important people, like the actors, and then they're followed by hundreds and hundreds of other people who've contributed to the film. And of course, the actors, the big names, they're important, aren't they? And yet, so are the lesser people, the ones behind the camera doing all the technical work too. Over Christmas, we watched a couple of films, and a little while ago, Ruby saw a credit rolling up, and it was for the best boy. And she said, "What does the best boy do?" And I didn't know. Does anyone know what the best boy does? No? Aaron does. The hand went up. But so what's the best boy?
It's to do with the lighting.
Yeah, it's to do with the lighting, absolutely. Apparently, it's the senior electrician on a film crew, second only to the gaffer. An important person to be electrician and lighting. There's lots of people involved in making a movie. And there's lots of people involved in God's story too. Not all are headline characters. Most of us know about those major people in the Bible, don't we? You know, people like Noah, Abraham, Moses, David, Jesus, Paul, Peter, and so on, all those big figures. But alongside all those headline figures, there's also these smaller people who are mentioned in passing. That doesn't mean they're insignificant. And so it's to some of these little legends, as I've called them for our series, that we're going to be looking at over the next 4 weeks. Now, I just have to make a little confession. I am leaning quite heavily on a couple of books that were written by my former pastor, Brian Edwards, but it's just helpful stuff, so I thought I would share that with us. Well, it's great being a Christian, isn't it? Everything always goes right. You know, we have no problems, no setbacks, no failures, no disappointments. All our plans work out perfectly. Being a Christian is thrilling because life is just so easy and so good. Isn't that your experience? No? Oh, okay. Right. It's not mine either, really. The Christian life, I'm sure we all know, is hard, and it often contains disappointments and frustrations. In all sorts of areas, we find difficulties, and you think, oh, why does it have to be like that? In fact, we even disappoint ourselves, don't we? We have an idea about the kind of Christian that we think we'd like to be, and then we look in the mirror and see the reality of what we are, and we think, oh, so is there any hope? Well, our little legend for today is John Mark. He doesn't get much of a mention in the Bible. He gets a few. But as we look at his story, I hope that we're going to be encouraged, because even if we've made mistakes, failure and shame don't have to be how our story ends. Well, John Mark's story has a comfortable beginning, and that's our first point, a comfortable beginning. The name John is a Jewish name. It means the Lord has shown grace. The name Mark, he was known as Mark as well, is Roman, and it's probably an adopted name that he or the family took. It suggests that he's from a family of rank, a family of wealth, a family of influence. And that's substantiated by what we read about him in the New Testament. So he was a Jew. He was brought up in Jerusalem. His mum is one of the 6 Marys that we read about in the New Testament. When Peter is released from prison in Acts chapter 12, without hesitation, Peter knows where to go. He knows where the church will be meeting. So Acts chapter 12, verse 12, Peter went to the house of Mary, the mother of John, that's John Mark, whose name was Mark, where many were gathered together and were praying. Many gathered at this house. So John Mark's house, or his mum's house anyway, was the established place for that early church to be meeting. That's where they knew to go. It had the space, it had the capacity. It's also speculated that this was the same house in Jerusalem where the 120 disciples gathered when the Holy Spirit came upon them in Pentecost. We don't know, but it's just a thought. So by anyone's standard, this house where many could gather, where it was the accepted place to go to meet with the early church, this was a big house in a good location. So they had money. There's further speculation that this was, John Mark, was the young man mentioned in Mark chapter 14, verse 51, who fled at Jesus' arrest at Gethsemane. In doing so, he lost his loincloth in the process, but it's just to mention he was around Jesus. He wasn't one of the 12, but he had been around Jesus, and he had a good Christian family. He even had the church regularly meeting at his house. So there was money, there was comfort, there was a good Christian upbringing. He was a young man who was, let's say, used to a certain level of living, and he wanted to serve the Lord. There's nothing wrong with those two things, is there? Who doesn't want to be comfortable? And it's great to want to serve the Lord. That's fine. But I do wonder whether this comfortable, sheltered Christian upbringing feeds into his later failure. You see, he had a faith, but it was untested, not weathered by the rigors of real life. I'm not really much of a gardener, but I've read that it's good to expose newly emerged spring plants to a little bit of wind. Obviously not too much, otherwise they'll be completely flattened, but a little gentle agitation helps strengthen the stem and the roots. The report I was reading said that plants grown in the absence of wind tend to fall over or break more easily than those grown with some buffeting. And I think that's true for Christians too. If our Christian experience is just one of ease and comfort, and there's been no challenges to our faith, when those challenges come, and they will come at some point, when they come, we're not going to know how to deal with them. We're going to think, what on earth has happened? And that observation surely has some bearing on how we bring up our children. We rightly want to protect them from everything, don't we? But we can't lock them up and keep them out of the world in that way. They need to be exposed to the world to some degree so they know how to deal with it. So they know, actually, there's some people that don't believe this stuff. So that they know how to deal with these storms when they hit. They need to learn what it is to be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves. Well, in any overly comfortable life, that does bring challenges to a Christian faith. Perhaps we sensed some of that when we met as a church on Zoom over the COVID period. How nice it was to attend church in our slippers and with a mug of coffee and perhaps some snacks just to keep you going. It was nice, wasn't it? I mean, I won't deny that. You sort of get out of bed, you're there, you turn it on, and it's great. That was very comfortable. And yet I think most of us realised, as good as that was in the short term, and as helpful it is to have YouTube for those who are ill and unable to physically attend, I mean, that's all great. But actually, it's not spiritually healthy in the long term. We need to be physically together. We need to be exercising our gifts together, serving one another together, not just seeing a face on the screen. But there was that temptation just to stay at home because it's comfortable. Being a Christian, not even a pioneering missionary, but just an ordinary, run-of-the-mill Christian, it's going to be inconvenient. So just coming to a prayer meeting takes effort, doesn't it? So why don't more of us come to a prayer meeting? Is it because we're tired? Maybe. Is it because it's a hassle? Well, probably it is, isn't it, really? You've just got in from work or whatever, you've had a long day with the kids, you've cooked dinner, the washing up's not done, and it's time to go out for a prayer meeting. You think, do you know what? I could do without that. So we stay at home. It's a hassle. Or maybe we're just so comfortable, we think, I just want to stay in and watch TV tonight. So we don't come to pray. Why do we have so few volunteers to serve the Lord in various church ministries? Could it be that we are so comfortable at home that we think, I'm not going to do that. Someone else can do that. We like the idea of serving the Lord and doing great things for him, don't we? We want to see people saved, of course we do. But at the end of the day, all this stuff, being involved, it requires someone to do something. It requires hard work. Serving the Lord can be jolly inconvenient at times. I just wonder how much our love of a comfortable and cozy life impacts our service and our walk with the Lord. Well, despite all I've said, John Mark's comfortable lifestyle didn't seem to squash his genuine zeal to serve. But as we're about to see, the idea of service and the reality didn't quite line up. And his faith is about to receive a bit of a blow. And we're going to look at that in our second point, a challenging work. When I was a young Christian, our church had a dynamic and gifted evangelist, and he did some work amongst the young people. He was actually one of the first people that showed me reading and studying the Bible wasn't boring. Because when he opened the Bible, it was like, whoa, this is exciting. It speaks, it talks, this is amazing. And he had that effect. It was like he brought it to life. He was very gifted. And he taught the Bible with passion and power. And wherever he went, most people loved it because he just like, boom, when he taught the Bible, everyone was going, yeah, that's great. Some people hated it because he was so confrontational and unorthodox, and he did have a tendency to offend people. But most people loved it, especially the young people. You know, he had this personality that was charismatic, and it was like, whoa, if you were with him, you thought you could do anything. And he took the young people away with him on missions, and we did holiday Bible clubs, and you thought, this is great, this is what mission is about. And, you know, there was a certain amount of pride in him and glory that was reflected from him. Because you thought, this guy is so good, you love to be with him. And when Paul and Barnabas are set aside by the Holy Spirit for the work of this mission, and they take John Mark, this young man, to be their helper, their assistant, what a privilege it was for this young man to go with these great missionaries, these men of God, pioneering through the world to share the gospel with people. Wow! What an opportunity. You can imagine him thinking, whoa, they've chosen me. This is good. This is great. And they're off and they go through the whole of Cyprus, proclaiming the word of God in the synagogues, speaking about Jesus. As we read there, Paul even defeats this magician in spiritual warfare, the proconsul. He comes to faith. This is exciting stuff. This is what mission is about, isn't it? Right? Exciting stuff. People being saved, the powers of darkness being vanquished, and people responding, spiritual victories. This is great. Wouldn't we love to see this? Oh, hopefully. And it can happen. You can see God moving and things happen sometimes. But the reality is, Christian mission, Christian service doesn't always go like that. In fact, often it's just really hard slog. Even for the apostles, it didn't always go well. And it seems that shortly after sailing from that success of Cyprus, things started to go wrong. So just to fill in a little bit of background, Barnabas was John Mark's cousin. So they are related. And Barnabas, he came from Cyprus, so where they'd just been with all the success. So whilst they were in Cyprus, they would have had all the security, the support of Barnabas' family and John Mark's family. They were there. They could help them. They could give them food and everything else. They were going to be well looked after in Cyprus. But now they leave that place. They sail and move on to the next place. And they're at about 500 miles from John Mark's home. Away from the comfort of home, away from the support, away from all those people who were going to look after them. And in this new place, there would be hardly any Jews and even less Christians. So you see how they're suddenly cut off in this new place, not supported. They land in Perga. Perga was a busy trade route. It was cosmopolitan. It was full of strange and unusual sights and sounds and experiences. It was big. There was a stadium. There was a theatre. There was impressive colonnaded wide streets. And there was a temple to Artemis, also known as Diana, to the Romans. So it's pagan. There's no interest in the gospel there. We don't read about any evangelism taking place at that place. In fact, they moved from Perga to Antioch in Pisidia with no explanation. The only thing that's noted, just as a little reference there, Acts 13:13, John Mark leaves them to go home. So what happened? We don't really know. Could have been John Mark simply wasn't prepared for the hustle and bustle of this pagan place. It could be that the work was just so much harder than he anticipated. He's got to go out and find supplies and food and maybe get a job, and he didn't sign up for that. It could be his sheltered life hadn't prepared him for the opposition and the hardship that he was now facing. And, he spoke to people about Jesus, and they were like, what? I don't want to hear about that. And especially now they haven't got that network of relatives to support them. Perhaps they're slumming it a bit, sleeping outside. There seems to be no open doors for the gospel, and the glow of success has subsided somewhat. Furthermore, there is the suggestion that Paul became ill at this point. You see, Antioch and Pisidia, where they had to go to when things got difficult, that bordered the territory of Galatia. In Galatians chapter 4, verse 13, Paul reminds the Galatians that it was because of illness that he ended up preaching to them in the first place. So he had to go there because he was ill. And that could be, we're thinking about now, the time when that illness gripped him in Perga. And maybe that all played into John Mark's disappointment. Even Paul is getting ill. This doesn't seem to be blessed by God. This isn't what he hoped for. Expectation, it didn't match reality. And things are hard. It's a far cry from the comforts and success that John Mark was expecting. Things are going wrong. And so John Mark gives up and goes home. One missionary leader suggests the top 3 reasons why some missionaries fail in their first term is 1, failure to keep close to God when friends fail. It's all very well to be able to feel like you're close to God when you're in a good church, you're supported by friends and everything's going well. But when that church lets you down, it can be hard. And if we haven't walked closely with God, we can be in serious trouble. Second, the difficulty of cross-cultural relationships. That could be a real challenge when you move to a place where you just don't know, you don't fit in. Thirdly, the task didn't live up to expectations. This is the reality of serving the Lord. It doesn't often go as we imagine or as we dream. The mission happens. The Christmas events happen. We try witnessing to a friend. We open the church up to be a warm space. We run the cap course. We do all this stuff. And it just doesn't seem to work out as we might have liked. No ground-shaking spiritual victories occur. Or you think, okay, I'm going to try and serve the Lord this year. You sign up for something, grass cutting, cleaning, preparing children's talk or whatever. And you try to do it and it's hard work and people are awkward. And you think, well, this isn't what I thought it would be. And then you do an effort, you run some meeting or something and hardly anyone turns up. The Lord's work is full of discouragements and difficulty. But we need to learn this doesn't mean it's a failure. Just because things don't turn out how we thought they should, it doesn't mean the Lord isn't with us. The lesson we need to learn is the Lord works in his way, not always the way that we think he should. Not always the way we were expecting him to. Not always the way we prayed he would. But he's still at work. His way is always good, pleasing, and perfect. Romans 12, verse 2. Even if to us it can feel disappointing and frustrating at times, we have to remember it is his will be done and not mine. Well, we might not be overseas missionaries, but we are on mission for Jesus wherever we are, whatever we're doing. At school, at college, in the home, wherever, we are still on mission for Jesus. And like John Mark, don't we know how hard it is? Perga was big and frightening and unsympathetic to the gospel. Isn't that like our workplace? Like your school, like the place you spend time in, even your home maybe? And the temptation is we retreat from it. We say, well, I'm not going to speak for Jesus. I'm not going to share because it's just too hard. I can't even think about doing that. It's scary. Or perhaps we pour our hearts into serving and nothing seems to happen. Nothing seems to change. So what is the answer? We are to keep close to the Lord. We are to serve him faithfully and prayerfully, trusting that his perfect will be done. Even if it doesn't turn out how I thought it should or how I thought it would, I'm going to trust him for the results. My job is to serve faithfully and prayerfully and let him take care of the rest. Just because something is hard, it doesn't mean we should just give up. Sadly for John Mark, the mission wasn't going as he anticipated, so he gives up, deserts his brothers and heads back to the comfort and security of home. There will be times that we do need to step back from a work. There are times to take a break. It's good and healthy to take a break. There are times to review what we're doing. There are times to stop, have a change, do something different, reinvent it. It's not working. Let's do something different. But this wasn't one of them. John Mark deserted them in that hour of need. I wonder if there's someone here who stepped back from what the Lord was calling them to do. Got hard. I wonder if there's someone here who didn't even step up. You know the Lord's calling you to do something, but you haven't stepped up because it's too scary. It's too hard. It's going to interfere with your comfortable life. Across the churches that I know, COVID has been a time of many people stepping back. Of course it is, because you can't do anything else. We couldn't do anything, could we? Really, it was really hard. For some people, that was a good thing, because some people were overworking themselves, burning themselves out, and it was just too much, and there needed to be that break. A helpful time to reset, to reevaluate. That can be helpful. But I wonder if some of us need to get our slippers off. It's easy to get too comfortable. Perhaps some of us need to get serving Jesus again. It's very tempting to just give up when it gets hard. So John Mark, he had a promising beginning. Then it all went wrong. The work was hard. It wasn't as he imagined, so he bailed. But thankfully, that wasn't how his story ends. So let's move on to our final point. A worker come good. Barnabas and Paul carry on the mission. They see a mixture of success and persecution. And after they've returned and given reports and a few years have passed, Paul and Barnabas, they want to revisit the believers that they've met along the way and see how they're doing. But unbelievably, Barnabas wants to take his cousin, John Mark, along with them. And Paul's like, no way! He deserted us. That's what the word means there. He deserted us. The word for deserted, it means shunned. He stood apart from us. It's the same word Paul uses in 1 Timothy 4:1 of someone who is abandoning the faith. It's a strong word. It's like they left, they went, they deserted, they just left us in the lurch. And there's such a sharp disagreement. That word can mean irritation. Between these two faithful brothers who've gone through thick and thin together, that they part company. You can imagine how it went. We need to get going, Barney. Well, yeah, but I think we should take John Mark with us. Oh, not this again. I've said he can't be trusted. We need people who we can rely on in this kind of work. But we should give him another go. Do you remember, Paul, how when you first believed, no one accepted you, and I had to take you under my wing and take you to the other believers and convince them? Oh, but that was different. And so it went on, and they couldn't come to a resolution. Well, who was right? Well, I don't know. Both had good points. You do want trustworthy, reliable people to be with you as you work for the Lord. You don't want people who are going to keep letting you down all the time. And especially if you're going to places where your life is going to be hanging in the balance sometimes, you want people you can trust on, rely on, don't you? Really frustrating when you're trying to serve the Lord and people keep letting you down. You think, oh, come on. But you also need to give people a chance to grow and train and learn and even make mistakes, because we all do when we're learning, especially. So these two different viewpoints, they're not easily compatible, especially in this situation. So as they separated, they went and served the Lord in separate places, in different locations, in different ways. Barnabas and John Mark returned to Cyprus. Remember that safer training ground for John Mark to mature a bit more. And Paul bypassed that to go elsewhere. But it's just helpful to remember people need the opportunity to grow, to train, to learn, to mature, without the consequences of failure being too dire. Many pastors, missionaries, have failed because they weren't prepared, they weren't ready, they weren't given the right support. And too much was thrust upon them before they were ready. But to get gospel workers ready, it takes time. And I hope we're the kind of church who want to see people developed, want to see people trained up and prepared for service. That would come under our part, the discipling part of our sort of vision. Discipling, helping people grow and mature and become more like Jesus. That might mean we have to put up with things being less than perfect for a bit. But if the church, I'm thinking worldwide church, if the church is going to survive, if our mission is going to continue, we need to see new elders, new deacons, new youth workers, new preachers, new home group leaders, new welcomers, new administrators, and so on. All of these being given a chance and being able to be trained up. I mean, I know a lot of us are scared about coming to the front to pray because we think, I can never pray like that. And you never will unless you start to pray. It's one of those things. But we need to be accepting of each other to say, okay, they're going to pray. And they're going to get things wrong. And it's going to be a bit, like that. But never mind, because in 5 years' time, they'll be really good. Someone else scared to read the Bible. Well, they need to have a chance to read the Bible, don't they? Someone else, they're too scared to, play their instrument or sing or something. Well, they need a chance to grow. I hope we're a church who give people the chance to grow. The wonderful thing about John Mark's story is that even when we or they mess up big time, that doesn't have to be the end. And let me encourage you, let me challenge you, perhaps. It's not over until it's over. You're still alive, aren't you? And so your story doesn't have to end in disappointment. If you thought, I thought I would be one of those Christians, but really, I'm one of these Christians. It doesn't have to be like that. You can be something else by the grace of God. So near the end of Paul's life, he was in a Roman prison. He was writing a letter to the Colossians, and he wrote in Colossians 4:10, "My fellow prisoner Aristarchus sends you his greetings, as does Mark, the cousin of Barnabas. You've received instructions about him. If he comes to you, welcome him." News about the desertion and the consequential rift had spread, and nothing spreads quite like gossip, juicy gossip about someone, does it? But 12 years later, Paul is saying, welcome him, welcome him. And in the letter that he wrote to Philemon, that would be delivered at the same time the letter to the Colossians. Paul calls John Mark a fellow worker. A fellow worker. Again, in that letter to Colossians, he calls John Mark his co-worker. A fellow worker, a co-worker. And then later, in the last letter that Paul wrote, just before his execution, so he knows the end's coming, just before he's about to die, who does he call for? At this critical moment, who does he call for? 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 11. Luke alone is with me. Get Mark and bring him with you, for he is very useful, very helpful to me for ministry. John Mark may not have been ready to be much of a help those 20 years beforehand, but now he's been given a little more time. He's been given opportunities. Someone's invested in him, and with patience, with kindness, with a teachable heart and a good mentor. Later on, he becomes someone who is very useful, a good fellow worker. He became a comfort instead of an irritant. He is the person Paul requests by name in his final days because he is helpful and faithful. But even after Paul's death, John Mark doesn't say, "Oh, well, that's it. Boss is over. I'm going to go home. My work's done now." He goes and he finds Peter. And he becomes like a son to Peter. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 13. Again, helping and serving and supporting. In fact, an early Christian leader wrote around AD 140 how it was Mark who was the interpreter for Peter and wrote down accurately all that Peter remembered. And that's how we got Mark's gospel. Isn't it amazing? How the young man who was so disastrously performed, so badly deserted God's chosen men on the mission field in their hour of need, he goes on to be this person who is used to inspire to write down the first gospel that was ever penned. Yeah, he caused this rift, this disagreement between brothers. But he wasn't finished, he wasn't cancelled, it wasn't like, "You've made that mistake, we're not interested anymore." He was given another chance, and he went on to write down the gospel which we have today. And you, as you look back over the last year, over the last decade, how's it going? Perhaps you wanted to do great things for God, but somewhere along the line, you retreated. Maybe you compromised. Maybe you got comfortable. Maybe you just got distracted. Wherever you find yourself now, it doesn't have to be where you'll be this time next year. Sin can be dealt with. The Lord can be sought and known. Your prayer life can be brought to life. Your Bible reading can be refreshed. Your service can start again. Your love and passion can be renewed. Our past mess, our past failure don't have to be the way our story ends. We can end well like John Mark. We can be useful to the Lord and his people. Well, let's be quiet before the Lord and consider these things.